Hello, happy Thursday. I'm Angela Alexandra with ReTech Marketing. We thank you in advance for your participation in this first of a three-part series that we're doing with our guest speaker, Dr. Basil Akra of the Akra team. We're going to dive into insights to transition timelines for placing legacy, MD, and IVD products on the EU market. Lots of information that we're going to cover. And if we move on to householding, note that we will be recording the session. If you have questions during, feel free to submit them in the question box. However, I believe that a lot of your questions are going to be answered in the content, and we did try to incorporate those incoming questions as part of our presentation. So thank you for doing that. And if you're having trouble with the audio, sometimes just clicking on the phone call is better than computer audio. And yeah, we'll be sending the slides and the video link to everybody that registered by email. So know that that will be coming your way in a couple day or two. And if we move on to a quick look at our speakers, we're thrilled to have Dr. Basil Akra. He's the CEO and owner of Akra team. They are a global acting consultancy company. Dr. Akra was a vice president of strategic business development at the Global Medical Health Services of, boy, I always want to know the pronunciation of that company, TUVSUD Product Services. So we're thrilled to have him on this three-part series, our Ask the Expert series. And of course, our own ReTech, Gary Sainer, he's our Senior Manager of Information Solutions in the ReTech Life Sciences Group. Subject matter expert on drug labeling, medical device UDI, and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. So with that, I'm going to turn our agenda over to Mr. Gary Sainer, who's going to be our MC and take us through our discussion topics.
Well, thank you very much, Angela, for that introduction and getting us started. We're thrilled to have Basil with us today. We're going to work our way through a couple topics here. We'll have a particular format where I'll introduce a topic, give a little bit of background, and then we appreciate Basil jumping in and giving us some good commentary and some answers to those questions that we have on those topics, and we'll repeat that pattern for a number of different products. There is opportunity for you to submit your questions, as Angela mentioned, and we'll have some time at the end to work our way through some of those live questions. But for the actual early part of the webinar today, we'll talk about the EU Legacy Device Transition Framework. So what I mean by that is just the timing, some of the regulations, requirements, all surrounding legacy devices, unique to legacy devices. This is not an MDR or IVDR compliant device. We'll reserve that for another day. And then with Basil present, would love to tap into his knowledge and have a little bit of discussion about the best practices that he would recommend and what is your strategy. So trying to figure out for your particular scenario, best way forward, and we'll get some comments from Basil on that, and then have those audience questions at the end. So with that as a introduction, let's turn our attention over to the EU Legacy Device Transition Framework. So we'll do this as a two-part. First, we'll cover medical devices, and then we'll move over to the IVDs. There was a question that came in, well, what is a legacy device? So let's knock that out right up front. We'll be using that term quite frequently, but as you consider your portfolio, you might have products that are into these three different classes or buckets, I should say, categories of devices. You might have some directive devices, and these are those devices that were put in place under a directive, but they were discontinued as of the date of application. So going back to the medical device directive, active implantable medical device directive, or in vitro diagnostic directive, they were placed on the market for a period of time, but then boom, date of application came and you decided not to continue with those. If you did continue with those particular products, they would be described as legacy devices. So they're still able to use that directive. It might have actually expired by now, but there's some special provisions that allow you to continue to place those products on the market. But that is not to be confused with the last category. Those devices that are compliant to a particular regulation, so the medical device regulation or the in vitro diagnostic regulation. So today we're going to focus right smack in the middle there, that legacy device bucket.
Gary,
if we go back roughly a year, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting you. Just to keep it very simple for everyone, legacy devices are very easily to consider every device which was previously under the directive placed on the market. Those are the legacy devices. So legacy devices which hold a certificate under the directive, and you are moving now to a new regime and new legislation. And this is actually a device which had before in the past already legal ability to be placed on the market. This is why they are named legacy devices, just to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. And they do have to have that directive certificate. So it does not include those devices that were self-certified. So really good clarification. If we go back about a year ago, you will remember that there's a legislation that came out 2023/607, and this particular amendment provided an extended period of time for medical device legacy devices, and it gave them additional time to be placed on the market, basically extended the time 3 and 4 years. I like to look at the a graphical presentation of this, so rather than work our way through the details, we'll take a look at a timeline starting with the date of application for MDR. Remember, that was originally scheduled 2021, but then extended 1 year to be 2020 rather, now extended 1 year later, 2021. But then we have those directive devices that, as of that date of application, were no longer placed on the market. And legacy devices now were extended, an earlier time frame, 3-4 years earlier, but now all the way out to end of 2027 for class 3 and 2B implantables, and another additional year to the end of 2027 for the class 2A and Bs and the one stereo measuring and reusable surgical devices. So that is quite a significant extension, and there were a number of reasons that caused that. But remember, this is different than those class 1 devices that were to be self-certified as of date of application if you continue to place them in the market. And then a number of these devices will eventually be going through an evaluation with a notified body and come in compliance with the notified body certificate. So that's the way forward. Legacy devices, they have some deadlines here, and after that, no longer be able to place on the market. So with that understood, here's a question. Maybe I'll just go out and read it here. Approximately 1 year ago, various factors, including delays in the medical MDR guidance and clarity, gradual ramp up of the notified body support, the slow industry implementation, and so on, caused the European Commission to extend the legacy medical device transition period 3.5 years and 4.5 years. So with that in mind, Basil, can you speak to some of these questions? Where do we stand today? Has this situation improved, since this amendment came out a year ago? And, where are we at with the total number of bodies? Does it look like we're able to address the marketplace and the need for all those different devices that need to be evaluated?
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for the summary and for those very key questions, actually, which we are talking about that since many years. So the situation is today comparable to the past years, getting better, but we are not good enough, and I tell you why. In 2022, we got more transparency about the numbers, and we recognize that actually we are far away from the real time to say actually we are heading toward the big move of at least 80% of devices to the new legislation. We were actually, end of 2022, by 10% of the total number of certificate, which should be moved from a directive to the regulation. Now today, the numbers are increasing. We are seeing that the curve is going up, but we are still seeing actually limited number of application on comparison to the certificate that were under the directive. So we have actually more notified bodies. Yes, the number of notified bodies increase. We started seeing notified bodies asking for application and urging manufacturer to apply because they are having more capacity to start working on the projects. Number of notified body didn't change that much between 2022 and 2024, but their capacity started to become more available because they were able to close a lot of projects which were in the past. They got also the learning effect curve, and they are now in the phase where they can execute a project much faster. They know much more about their customer portfolio. But we are still in trouble. This is why we have more time. This is why the legislator gave us more time, but we should use that more and additional time wisely to ensure that latest by 2028, we have all devices covered by the new legislation. So manufacturers who are deciding today to say, let's delay it more because we have more time, this is not a clever decision because this will cost you actually potentially your market access to European Union and to the other market which are relying on the European Union certificate. So summary, we are getting better. Summary, manufacturers should not stop their activities, and notified bodies are now taking more applications. So it's not anymore a justification to say I'm not filing a notified bodies. Notified bodies are available. Now, a lot of people will ask me, is it easier today? No, it's not easier. You're going to still get your questions. You're going to still get challenged because everyone is still learning about the MDR and everyone is still actually undergoing this evaluation process. But you have more availability to be able to submit, and you should make use of it and don't wait till the end to have a peak again of recertification of MDR product, which might push you again back in timeline and lead to problems.
Yeah. All right, very good. A lot of good detail there. And it actually is a good transition over to a topic that I want to pick up on that. Along with this regulation that was made available, a lot of criteria. The good news is we're not going to work our way through every one of these bullet points, but we'll leave that for homework. The couple that I want to highlight that are in place and would be used by the commission to help facilitate adoption so that companies don't put it back on the shelf for another 2 or 3 years. Down at the bottom, there's 2 bullets I'd just like to highlight. One is that the QMS, which is compliant with the MDR, would be installed May 26th of 2024. And along with that particular date, when you engage your notified body, have an application in place. And then there's also provision in the legislation that your basic device identifier, your UDIDI, would be assigned. And then 4 months later, you would have a signed agreement milestone. So if we look at this on a graph, what we didn't talk about are these 2 milestones previously. One is May 26th of this year, and then September, where the particular criteria about the QMS and notified body engagement so comes into play. So that is very early, years before the actual deadline, but it does place a criteria to make sure that manufacturers continue to engage in moving forward with the MDR implementation. So with all that understood, the background here is that extension was only for those companies that met the progress milestones that we just talked about. And noteworthy is that the first milestone of May 26, 24 is just 2 months away. So if you had not made some adjustments or plans or execution along that particular milestone, you really need to move quickly, and you might actually miss it. So I have a couple questions for you, Basil. Has industry, the clients that you talk to, do you feel that they were diligently moving forward to this deadline? Are they going to be able to meet it? And then a follow-up there is, in the event they don't meet the deadline, what recourse do they have? They would still love to be able to put their product on the market. Is there any workarounds? Do they have to do anything special?
Yeah, very good questions, Gary. So the first point, I think we need to differ always between the various industry. Now, the majority of industry was and still executing towards actually the deadline of May 2024. So they didn't look to this additional time. Now, this additional time gave them a bit of relief, especially with regard to re-registration of their devices in other countries and making sure that they can move their production process from the old legislation to the new legislation. So this is a bit of relief for those industry who were actually pushing hard toward the deadline. Now, we have industry that was still believing that the MDR will disappear one day. And those manufacturers will not actually change their opinion. They will hope to still make use of the total time. And this is wrong, because this will lead to actually at the end the punishment. And then you will be guilty by yourself. And third, you have industry that was disadvantaged by the system because they weren't able to apply, because the one that they were working with, the previous notified body that they want to continue working with, is still under designation, because we still have 12 notified bodies under designation. Not all of them are designated. We mentioned 44 before for the MDR. It's still actually not the total number. And some of these manufacturers do not want to leave their notified bodies. This is a wrong decision, I would say, because now you need to make use of a possibility which is given by the amended regulation. This possibility is telling us you need to at least be prepared. You need to show that you did some effort, you prepared the quality management system. You don't need to be certified for MDR yet, because you can't, but at least you did your job internally. And then you need to file an application to a designated notified body and get with them in an agreement by September. And you need to meet the Article 120 obligation, which were set to you in May 2021, that need to be met since then. If you are doing all of that, you will be succeeding and having more time till, as you mentioned before in your graphical overview, 27, 28 December of these years. Now, is there a recourse around it? No, there is. There is no possibility, if I'm not meeting all those obligations, to go like somewhere and hide myself. I might hide myself, but then latest one surveillance authorities identify that it's actually criminal, because then you are placing a device on the market which is not legally allowed to be placed on the market. So you need to do your job, you need to prepare and make use of this chance which is given by legislator. It's not an automatic translation, let's say transition period. A lot of people believe they got like a waiver now and they have till 2028. You need to assess if you are, first of all, eligible for that additional time. Do you have the supportive evidence for it? Starting by, do I have an application to the notified body? Did they accept that application? Not just actually, I wrote them an email or I called my buddy from the notified body and he said to me, I'm happy to take you. It has to be documented. You need to have documented evidence to ensure when you are getting audited, to show that you have at least what MedTech Europe created for industry to help them. They created a manufacturer declaration template. And a lot of people ask me, how can I document it? It's the best document which you can use, because it's including all the element, which is Article 120 including, and this would help you actually documenting your evidence, putting them together and making sure that you are prepared to make use of this additional time. So this is my summary. Do your job, be ready. Time is ticking. May 2024 is actually in front of the door. You will close your eyes, come back to the office and recognize I passed the date and I can't place devices anymore on the market.
Yeah, and that's really serious. That's a drop in the revenue stream for a manufacturer. And think about it, this will affect the patients, not being able to have those products available to them. So it's a really significant deadline. What I would like to do is move our topics over to the IVDs. And I think we'll have a similar type of discussion, but the timing is different. If we look at the IVDs, this is what is currently in place without a proposed legislation. So only to the May of 2025 are legacy IVDs able to be placed on the market. There are a huge number of IVDs that are receiving a certificate for the first time because of the IVDR. And there's a schedule of how long they are able to be placed on the market, starting in 2025, 2026, and 2027. So there's a lot of products that fall into the second category. And then just for completeness, this upper top row would be those IVDRs Class A's. So they have to be self-certified, and then any other device that follows the IVDR. Now, even with this timeline, there was a lot of concern by the commission because of the slow progress, and similar to what we just talked about earlier, understanding the guidance, it was brand new, and notified bodies coming up, being educated, getting staffing, slow industry implementation, and so on. So this was actually expected to cause some product shortages. And do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Basil? I think there's a number of situations here. The numbers don't look good. And then we'll talk about the proposed legislation in the next couple slides.
Yes, sure. Happy to speak about that. I think the IVD situation is much more critical than the medical device situation. Why? Because in IVD sector in the past, under the directive time, we had nearly 20% of the holistic IVDs on the market under the notified body conformity assessment involvement. So this was actually a small number of devices which required during conformity assessment procedure to involve a notified body. With the IVDR, we have a shift. So from 20%, we moved to 80%. So in the past, the number of notified bodies was very limited. So historically, you didn't need a lot of notified body expert and notified bodies to address that. And that's why it was historically as well, you had like more than 86, 90 approximately notified bodies for medical sector, and nearly 9 or 10 who were covering the IVDs. Now with the IVDR, we still have a similar low number of IVD notified bodies, but their expertise had to ramp up over the time to make sure that they are preparing for the IVDR. Now, in the IVD sector, those are a very special, let's say, expertise, which are not available in such a wide number that you can find them. For the medical device sector, notified bodies were really facing challenges to find the expert. In an IVD, they face bigger challenges to find the expert and to make sure that they have actually sufficient resources. If you look to notified bodies today who are MDR and IVDR designated, you will find that they have for the MDR sector nearly 1,000, 1,200 expert, and for the IVDs, perhaps 80, 60 expert, whereas they are actually a large organization, but they don't have that expertise and that number of experts which is needed. So which is resources limitation, which is the same problem, not just for the notified bodies, as well for the IVD industry. Now, by having this change and shift and involvement of notified bodies, the number requires actually more attention of the notified bodies and more resources to be able to digest the IVDR. Now, manufacturers for IVD, which were actually not under control of notified bodies, are now facing challenge because they didn't have that experience, they didn't have that exposure. They were able to do self-declaration in the past all the time, and now they are undergoing a new system which is always scrutinizing what they are doing, which requires a lot of, let's say, learning, attention to make sure that you understand how to deal with such a certification process. And this is taking a lot of time. And also it's showing that those industries, because they didn't have that exposure in the past, they are hesitant to start the process. They are scared about the process. And some of them, they are hoping that this will not happen. and they don't want to hear about it even. So if you look to the IVD notified bodies today, they tell you that most of the major industry that was already in that are like the big players, they are nearly done with the IVD transition to IVDR. If you ask them about the remaining ones, they will tell you we don't know where they are, because they didn't have a contact to them even in the past, and they will need to come, and this is taking longer than expected, and this is why we see that as challenging for the IVD sector, and this is why the Commission did the suggestion this year in January to talk about the new timelines again.
Yeah, yeah, and this was a really significant problem. It caused the European Commission to propose a legislation. So let's take a look at that. And that just recently came out January 23, not passed in legal law as of yet, but the proposal greatly extends the life, the transition period for those IVDs. It still keeps the classes, so it's scheduled by class A, B, and C, and D, but you'll see about a 2.5-year extension based on this particular proposal. So if we now look at a new version of that graphic that we just looked at, remember, this first legacy timeline was back in the 2025 timeline, but now going out to 2028, and then the schedule of those 3 additional timelines covering class D, C, B, and A sterile goes way out to 2028, 2029, and really the end of December 31st, 2029, almost 2030. So that is a greatly extended period of time. Let's talk about that a little bit. Can you give us some insight onto legislation, Basil? Do you expect this to be passed as is? It's going to be pushed through, or is there going to be a lot of discussion and changes here and there? And anyway, do you think this will come out very quickly and expediently?
I mean, historically, from what we saw from the European legislator, they are taking actions. And they are taking actions because at the end, the voice of the patient, the voice of the healthcare system need to be heard and followed. And they recognize we have an MDR and IVDR that were published, and they weren't actually adopted in a timely manner because the time from the beginning wasn't really evaluated with regard to feasibility. And we highly appreciate what the Commission is doing because they took action. They recognize we need to take that additional, let's say, measure. Last year, we had the amendment for the regulation, and it was passed because everyone understand the problem. I expect the same here with the amendment which happened, which is not just covering the IVDs, by the way, it's covering more than IVD, and I will mention that just in a minute. They're gonna also let that pass, and we're gonna be expecting this in the next 14 days to be published in the official journal. This is what I assume from my point of view, because I think this is actually an important measure to support the continuity of the healthcare system. On the other side, this amendment to the legislation is also addressing additional points, and those additional points are related to also problems related to the healthcare system, because in this amendment, they are also introducing an obligation for medical device and IVD manufacturers with regard to shortages of devices on the European market, that they're going to receive an obligation to report about that 6 months in advance. When they are aware that something going to happen, they will not be able to place devices on the market, or they have supply chain issue, which shows that they are actually looking long term on how the healthcare system in Europe can be protected from discontinuity of specific and relevant devices and IVDs, which are important for the market.
Yeah. All right, very good. So along with this extra time comes again a number of criteria that a manufacturer would have to follow, and we'll let you go back and read that. But down at the bottom, there's 2 very similar items that need to be in place progress milestones, very much like what we just saw on the medical devices. But now it's extended. There's a period of time, May 2025 for the QMS, and then this assessment in the basic UDI-DI. So now let's redraw that graph, and we see that there's some additional milestones that are placed. First one showing up a year from now, where you have that QMS and need to engage a notified body, put your application in, and then September later in that year, and then it's grouped in three sets, based on these particular classes, whether it's a D, a C, or a B and an A here at the end. All right, so let's get some questions here. This is a much steeper regulatory hill, and I think you've done a great job of describing that and the reason for that, just because there's not a knowledge base that industry as well as notified bodies can build upon moving into the IVDR. What is your impact, or what is your understanding? Do you see some industry early adopters? Do you see some people that are just still trying to put it away? Are they going to meet these deadlines and then eventually meet the final deadline of migrating eventually over to the IVDR compliant device? What are your thoughts here?
I think we will always, like always in life, it depends on the industry and their vision and their let's say and plans. The majority, and this is what I hope, will continue regardless of this extension, because they want to make sure that they are compliant and they want to make sure that they are actually providing the healthcare system with the relevant devices. We will have always outliners, but those outliners will actually at the end lose, because delaying is never a solution. You need to take measures, you need to implement, and you cannot avoid the fact that legislation over the time change, state-of-the-art change, and you need to also address that to make sure that you can ensure market continuity. Now, what will be the impact and what will happen in the upcoming years? We will see that. My recommendation to all IVDs or medical device industry, use the additional time wisely, speak to your notified body, you make use of this, let's say, ability to have communication in advance. Don't delay and hope that next in 2029 we will get additional amendment. Now it is actually giving us an opportunity to make use of this time to ensure that the MDR and IVDR are implemented. So make use of them. And it is a requirement which will not disappear. So don't sleep anymore. Make sure that you are in compliance and ensure that your product continues to make use of the market and you are not killing your company because of your delays.
Yep. All right, really good words of wisdom there, and hopefully it's landing on ears that take that advice. You had mentioned that there's some other provisions in this proposal. One of them had to do with the UniMed rollout. We won't go into that particular topic this session, but stay tuned. That's actually slated for the part 3 of this webinar series, where we'll get into the timing and the impacts of UniMed being mandated early. And I think you alluded to the other couple topics in this proposal. Noteworthy at the bottom, there is that supply notice about a 6-month advance if there's a foreseeable interruption that would cause a risk of serious harm. So really good information on IVDRs and what's coming out with this proposal. I did collect the various diagrams and graphics and put it all together in one. So if you happen to make both or manufacture both medical devices and IVDRs, here's your consolidated timeline. And most important on this, in my opinion, is the particular deadline that you have to follow. So there's a number of milestones along the way that we just talked about. This is just a summary screen. Angela, I believe you have a poll question all queued up. Why don't we do that real quickly?
All right, let's do that. If you folks don't mind playing along, let us know, when do you plan to register your EU legacy devices to Unimed? Select the best answer for your legacy devices. Is that going to be early, during the voluntary period, or at the start of the mandatory period, at the end, or you're looking to delay as long as possible to submit your MDR IVDR version? So we'll give it a second or two here. We see the responses coming in. Thank you very much. And okay, I'm going to close that and then we'll share the results here. Okay, so folks taking the advice, let's work on it early during the voluntary period, followed by start of the mandatory period. Great.
All right, very good. Yeah, it looks like some interest in making the early volunteer period. Okay, so let's talk about some best practices now. When we went over some of these topics, there can be a lot of confusion about, you know, what are some good things for me to remember? What are the challenges? There are various provisions where you still have to comply with directives and the national member state regulations. And regarding post-market surveillance, vigilance, registration of those operators and devices, they will come into play when Unimed is mandated and fully functional. But also, do you want to share a little bit, please, about the challenges that are unique to these legacy devices and some things that you would recommend? You know, what are the 3 best recommendations that a company should consider, and any other items that might be worthwhile here?
The first, I mean, the biggest challenge what I'm still seeing as of today, and I was telling about that when the draft of the legislation very early the stage was under establishment, that a lot of people do not read what is required. So this is the first challenge which I'm seeing. So my recommendation to that, read the regulation, read the guidance, make sure that you understand what is expected from you. Second point, which I'm still seeing, and this is actually where I'm seeing that manufacturers are facing challenge because they have legacy devices, they are still living in a dream, and the dream is don't change the past. The past will have to change because we have a new legislation. We are still saying new, by the way, it's not new anymore. It's actually 7 years old. 7 years old is not new. So we should be already actually in a phase where we are talking about a future and not talking about the legislation anymore. So make sure that actually you forget the past legislation, look to what is newly expected and adopt the new expectation according to the new rules. The third point, which is very important, which is key, is the fact that a lot of people didn't do a gap assessment and start addressing those gaps by collecting data. If you have no data, if you have a gap in your data setting, you need to collect the data in advance to your submission. You can't expect that you can submit and promise a notified body you're going to address a compliance topic afterwards. You need to make sure that you are in compliance when you are submitting to your notified body. So those are important aspects that I would recommend to manufacturer. Read regulation, forget your previous methodology and strategy, look to collect the data to be compliant with the regulation, and make sure that you speak to your notified body in advance to ensure that your submission will go in a reasonable way and you are not getting surprises about their expectation and timelines.
All right, I think those are really valuable suggestions. Any other pitfalls? I think you covered those as well. I think what we'll do now is move over to some discussion on the actual strategy. Let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at the first one. What is the recommended roadmap for placing and removing eventually EU devices on the market. Is there any timing, or are there any procedures, anything that you would recommend there, Basil?
I mean, placing a device on the market mean I am already compliant to the official legislation which is valid for my kind of device. Placing a device, it means I am starting to offer the device to a European Union market, which could be one of the 27 member states, or all of them, or some of them. And to place the device on the market, I need to have a clear strategy in advance. You need the regulatory strategy as an organization to be able to start placing devices on the market. And you need to consider in that strategy what is actually the applicable requirement which I have to meet from a European level, and what are the regulatory requirements which I need to meet on a regional level, because you might have additional local requirements which need to be met before you place a device on the market. Now, just to keep it simple and not go into a lot of details, with regard to removing from the market, the decision to remove a device from a market might be related to a lot of aspects. It could be that I'm having an issue. Then the removal, which gonna be called a recall potentially, is something different than when I'm actually ending the life cycle of a product and deciding to stop placing it on the market because it's not anymore actually requested, or it was replaced by more innovative one, or it was replaced by a system, whatever, or that I'm not having a market share. I might have a lot of reason to remove a device from the market. To decide on that, I think an organization need to have a quality management system which has actually a clarity with regard to the product life cycle management and how they're going to deal with that. And they need to have a procedure how to deal with also safety issues which might require field safety corrective action, field safety notice, or recalls. This is important with regard to recommended roadmap. I think what is very important on top to this roadmap, we talk about placing on the market, which could be placing on the market for the first time under MDR or IVDR, but it could be also connected to the fact that I'm making use of this additional time, which you mentioned, Gary, when you spoke about having an opportunity to place additionally for the next year's IVDs or MDs on the market. To be able to make use of this additional time, I need to have also a plan where I'm gonna say, how long would I use that time, and what are the obligations which I need to meet in parallel to make sure that I can make use of that time. And I need to document that as well to be able to protect my organization from a risk of placing devices which are potentially not compliant with the applicable requirement.
Yeah, very good. So the other question I had was, I know some companies, they just gave up trying to meet the higher cost of complying with the regulations, and they left their product back at the date of application, no longer placed on the market. But now there's this criteria that there was no significant change. And there might have been a number of technology improvements and enhancements that a company would have loved to, bring out and introduce, but they had not gone through the full conformity assessment. So they're kind of stuck with this, design that's frozen way back to the certificate that they originally received. So they have two decisions, or a decision to make. One is they could go and take that very same device that might be outdated now and have that go through the conformity assessment, and then now we have this medical device equivalent device, as it's referred to, being evaluated. The other option there is this would be the prime opportunity for a company to roll out all those additional advantages. Oh, it's going to be so much better. It'll position ourselves better in the marketplace. We have these new features, and now they have this medical device substitute device. And the intent in this model would be the notified body would come in and evaluate the substitute device. Obviously, there's some more technical documents that you need to pull together and so on. It might take a little bit longer. What is your thoughts, Basil, in picking, one of these two pathways?
So I think it's very important to understand the reason for each of them. Changes is actually related to my device or my quality management system. Part of a good quality management system is an important step, which is a continuous improvement. every manufacturer is required to continuously improve the device and improve their system by learning from the market, from post-market application. And also every manufacturer is interested to improve a product design by learning from technologies, advancement, and not just from post-market experience, but also by technology possibilities, where you want to address risk, you want to make sure that you are also making better usability of devices, making sure that you are addressing actually the development in the technological field to make sure that your user, your patient are benefiting from actually the advancement in technologies. All of that might trigger a technology change, which could be significant or not significant. When you are referring to significant change as it's written in the Article 120 or 110, those are related to actually transitional provisions. The legislator wanted to make sure when they introduced that wording that if a manufacturer is planning or having a significant change to a device which is legacy, what you mentioned before, want to make use of that transition period, they should assess if they are having a significant change during that period, because this might trigger the fact that they need to move with that significant change directly to MDR or IVDR. So they wanted to tell them your transitional provisions are connected with limitation, and those limitation is to ensure consistency for those devices over the time which you are making use in addition. And if you want to introduce something which is significant from a design perspective, then you are required to move directly to the new regulation. It's not allowed, it is actually just connected with conditions. The other point which you mentioned with regard to substitute device, this is a completely different aspect which was introduced with regard to the transitional provisions, because some manufacturers said we might have a device A today and we will not apply for device A because for the MDR we were working on a device B which can do the same thing what A does, but actually with an improvement. And the transitional provisions were actually just connected at the beginning to the device itself if you are applying for that device to make use of the additional MDR or IVDR timeline. And now with the substitute, if you apply for that replacement device, so you apply for it, then you can make use for your legacy device, which will not move to the MDR at all. You can make use of this transitional provisions. Those are principles which need to be understood and considered when talking about them, because a lot of people are mixing up how these languages can be used with regard to the legislation. And so legacy strategy is all about actually, will I use the same device to the MDR? Will I replace that device by a new device? And what am I planning with the previous device? Will that device disappear from the market, or will it be actually remaining on the market? All of these questions I need to ask, and then I can decide what would be the best approach.
Yeah, it's not a black and white answer, and you bring up a lot of good considerations. You kind of have to evaluate this one off at a time and see what's good for this particular product. It's not a universal decision. The last question there about there might be reasons not to migrate a legacy device at all, and I think you touched on that. So with time, I'm just going to move on. We want to get to some questions here from the audience as well. Before we do that, I just wanted to graphically show the situation that companies need to evaluate. They have this framework, and there's a similar framework for IVDs, but we'll just use legacy devices here as an example. We know about this time period for legacy devices. We know about the particular milestones that need to be completed, and we also have this particular registration period that is being proposed. And with all that in place, you make this decision about, do I take my legacy device and get it assessed by notified body and keep it the same, or do I roll in some changes? And hopefully you're able to do that. Now, some companies have actually done that, or very early, but we're seeing that this transition is actually delayed, and it slides to the later and later years away. And hopefully it doesn't slide any more than that, because now you're at the end of the life of your legacy device. The one impact, and we'll talk about this in the next webinar, is when this mandatory period of registration occurs, you may not have your medical device already approved and ready to be placed on the market at that time. So the certificate would not be available. So now you'll have to register a particular device, and it will be the legacy. But anyway, there's some conversation that we'll touch on that in the next webinar number 3. All right, Angela, let's roll it out. Let's do this final poll question, and then we'll get to some live questions.
All right, sharing the next poll. So again, if you participate, love to see your responses. What % of your portfolio is EU legacy devices? So pick your percentage there, and we'll give it a second or two. All right, and it looks like we're stabilizing a bit here. So I'm going to close the selections. And then we'll share that. So 35%, 100%. Interesting. 75% for 23%. So quite a bit. Thank you so much for participating there. Very interesting results.
Yep. Hopefully this.
Yeah, but it's not surprising me, to be honest, because a lot of devices are established on the market since many years, and limited number of devices are we are seeing are coming new. What we see as a new devices are devices which are like looking into software as a medical device, devices which are based on an AI solution, and some devices which are further development of legacy devices. But to see a lot of completely new technologies coming to the market is not really a huge number, because the medical device sector underwent that technology change already some years ago, where we saw a huge innovation coming in. But now we are not seeing that huge innovation anymore. We are seeing more advancement, development, and improvement in devices, and some innovation in a specific field which is connected to digital healthcare system, digital solution, and so on, which is becoming actually a huge number of additional devices coming into the market.
Yeah, very good. I think we have 8 minutes or so for some live questions. Angela, I know you've been monitoring some of these as we've been going through this discussion. Do you have a couple questions there that came in live that you would like to pick from?
Yeah. This one is about new products. Are there any plans for a similar approach for new devices and new companies trying to enter the market? While notified bodies are focused on transitioning legacy devices, new devices are not coming to market, and new companies are struggling to enter the market. Basil, what are your thoughts on that one?
I mean, we are supporting a lot of new companies coming to the market. We have a lot of new companies who want to enter the market for the first time. I think the legislation, if you are a new company and you want, you prepare yourself and your regulatory strategy in the right way, and you do not look to what was the past in Europe, you just look to the legislation, you have an opportunity to get to the market. The legislation doesn't have an easier pathway because you are new or you are small, because notified bodies need to assess it according to the same rules. And even if you are new, you will not be able to avoid actually having, for example, your clinical evidence for your device, and you don't have an easier pathway because you don't have an establishment level. Now, if your challenge is not finding a notified body, happy to support you. I can find your notified body in a very fast way. If your challenge is that you don't want to do clinical or testing, then you will not have an alternative than doing that. Now, finally, if your challenge is actually that the notified body assessment is taking very long, it is you are raising a fair point, because notified bodies capacities are loaded, and this is why an assessment is taking between 12 and 18 months depending on the risk class of a device. But what is very important is always early communication, and notified bodies are not allowed by law to disadvantage any application coming in. They have to check if they have capacity and resources, and if they take an application, then you will be part of their planning process. So if you are new or old, they will consider it in the same way.
So I did have a follow-up question on that, Basil. Before MDR, IVDR, the rule of thumb was introduce your new product into the European market first. It's a little bit easier, then introduce it in the United States. And that might have flipped a little bit because of all the confusion with MDR. What are your thoughts? Do you think this will settle down and eventually still be that EU is the preferred initial location, or is it going to flip to the United States first?
I mean, this message is true for today because everyone who is applying for a new device doesn't have the ability in most of the cases to lose time, and doesn't have the ability to go in a system which is still in the learning curve process. The MDR is still, even if it's 7 years old, is still under training and learning. People are still educating themselves about it. And this leads to unpredictability because you don't know what will be the output. You don't have really good experience on what is good, what is not good. FDA is a long established system, which is actually, especially with regard to 510K, easy to go for most of the manufacturers because they know what to expect. MDR for lower risk devices, you don't know today what to expect. You can expect horrible stories, or you can expect a success story, and the number of success stories are at this moment very limited. In the past, the MDD and the IMDD and the directive for IVDs were simple for manufacturer because they were known. They knew what to expect. And now with the MDR and IVDR, they are facing surprises because they are still living in the dream, and the dream was the past, and the past is not available anymore. And this is the challenge that everyone is facing. So yes, we have that shift at this moment. It will settle, but it will take time. And I can remember actually when I was working for a notified body, even after 30 years of directive time, we were still discussing what was written in that directive because people were seeing that as completely new requirement. And I honestly speaking, I think all what we need is predictability and transparency, and this is what we expect with the MDR and IVDR, and hope that this will happen in the upcoming years.
Yeah, really, really good. Angela, is there another question that we can fit in here yet?
Yeah, and Gary, this might be for you actually. Just kind of advice on is MDD device UDI regulation available, and by when should we begin the directive UDI data submission?
Well, the real quick answer is we'll talk a little bit later on that in the third webinar in a lot more detail, actually. The quick answer is the pre-production environment for UDIMED is open, and we've submitted a number of devices so that you can register now. In addition to that, the voluntary period is also open since 2021 for the device module inside UDIMED. So you are able to submit early. More importantly than the actual submission is to collect that data together, bring all the attributes that are in place. There's a huge number of attributes, double the number of attributes than what the US had. So over 111 is my last count. And by collecting that into a repository and testing it against the current business rules is very important, even before you might submit. And you know what, I see our time here, so I'm just going to move a little bit over into the particular solution that RETEC offers, a single source solution, where we target this solution for manufacturers of medical devices. And the function there is to collect that data, validate it, and that can happen very early, immediately. I would recommend doing that as soon as possible. You can actually collect your basic UDI, DIs, and you know, have that collection in place, meeting one of your milestones. But the early collecting, cleansing of that data is important, and then submission into the pre-production. We can talk about that time frame. It can be done. We have done, I don't know, 20,000 of those particular submissions, and then I would hold off until the final announcement that the UTMed is fully functional before I would submit into the production environment. Some already have, and that's certainly possible. You need to figure that out, but we have some recommendations there. If you would like to talk further on that topic or other topics related to medical device registration, you can get a hold of our life sciences team. Also go to our website. There's a lot of good resources there. You can drill down and find some good articles under that knowledge center. Basil, if people need to get a hold of you, what's the quick summary? You want to go through a couple of your company slides here?
Yeah, we are a consultancy company who's supporting on EUMDR, IVDR, clinical, as well as US FDA submissions. If you need consultancy, auditing, training, or writing of documentation, you can drop us an email on info@akrateam.com, and we are happy to help you either from Europe directly or the US. So looking forward to work with you and to help you on being compliant and achieving your success. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Basil, it's been
Basil,
great.
I noted a paraphrase from you. The dream is past and reality is ahead.
That's it. That's it.
All right. It's been so wonderful, having you join us today. Akra, we're looking for the second and third webinar in the series. More details to come. Angela, you want to close us out?
Yeah. Just thank you for all of our participants in registration. Look for that email with the links that you can share with your team. And we'll have links to both of our panelists here. Thank you again, Dr. Basil Akra and Akra team for wonderful insights. And we look forward to the next in the series. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.